Sorry, no powdered wig. However, this will still be my review of The Great Awakening, A Brief History with Documents. Brief word about the author. Thomas S. Kidd is currently an associate professor at Baylor University. He teaches in the history department. He has 7 books in publish, as well as several articles, and another book in the publishing process now. The Great Awakening would be defined as the time period of 18th century colonial America in which the Christian faith received a major overhaul. As we look back and forth among the documents that will be reviewed in this book, we can pick out several different camps of people during the Great Awakening period. Historians would normally have divided them into 2 separate camps, what they have called the Old Lights and the New Lights. The Old Lights being those that would oppose the Great Awakening revival, thinking that the New Lights were too radical and focusing too much on emotionality. And the New Lights, of course, would be those who were in support of the revival and thought that there was a need for that Christian overhaul. The focus of the New Lights was shifting from this lifelong commitment to Christ and the church to this new phrase of being born again. The New Lights would argue that this traces its roots all the way back to Jesus and the disciples, and that the Old Lights were just simply getting it wrong. However, as Kidd points out, the people of the Great Awakening should rightly be divided actually into 3 separate groups. What he calls the moderate evangelicals would be the middle of the road, the ones that supported the concepts of the Great Awakening. However, they were not so thrilled with the idea of focusing on the emotionality or the fleetingness of the emotions that the radical evangelicals were seeking. They wanted everyone to have an overwhelmingly emotional conversion experience. And a good example of this would be in the introduction, the very first part where he talks about James Davenport, who in 1743 burned his pants in front of a group of people to illustrate the point that clothing was becoming a hindrance to the people's spirituality. In this book, there are 36 documents by various authors, and each document, of course, has its own perspective towards the Great Awakening, telling its own story or telling the points that the author had to give out. Some notable authors of these documents would be Jonathan Edwards, who was a pastor in Northampton, Massachusetts. He was probably one of the first to experience the Great Awakening revival, and he experienced it among his youth who conformed to Christian standards and conformed to Jonathan Edwards' pleas for this evangelical conversion, and did so without being pushed by their parents. So the revival started among the youth and then eventually spread to the adults as well. Some other notable figures to mention would be George Whitefield, who was converted at Oxford University and became kind of the Billy Graham of this time period. Timothy Cutler was another notable person who was very much opposed to the revival. And as we go throughout the rest of these documents, we see many different perspectives, and the perspectives of people often changed from side to side. I don't think I mentioned, but the years in which the Great Revival experienced its most number of converts and the time period in which we focus will be 1740 through 1743. Now, my opinion of this book, I was rather shocked, actually. I didn't expect going in to find as much useful information as I did. Not only was this book a great synopsis of the history that was actually quite interesting, but it's very relevant today still. The evangelical roots, of course, have not been extinguished, and many of us claim to be members of evangelical churches. So as I read this, I was very much impressed with the usefulness that these ministers laid out in their writings. And so I very much intend to use this in my teaching settings in the church for many years to come. So I would recommend this book to anyone who is interested in their evangelical roots. Thank you very much.